With arrays, booleans, objects, numbers, and strings, we had a look at the most important, or almost all of the most important data types you have in JavaScript. Now, there are two additional important data types and one strange value which looks like a data type. And that would be null, undefined, and NaN. Now, what's that? So these are kind of special values, though null and undefined are both values and data types. So what's the idea behind that? Undefined is the default value uninitialized variables have. So if you create a variable and you don't assign a value at the beginning with the equal sign, then this variable is undefined. We also saw undefined in the log when we tried to access an element in the array at an index where no element was created yet. Then we tried to access an element which wasn't there, and therefore we got back a value of undefined. So that's a value. It's a value that indicates that nothing's there. But at the same time, it's also a separate data type. So just like numbers and strings are a data type, undefined is also a data type actually. Now, you should never assign undefined to a value on your own, so never write equals undefined, because that's just a default value you have if something has never been assigned a value. Now, you could have cases in your code where you indeed get something where you're not sure if it's undefined or not, and later you will learn how you can check whether a value is defined or undefined, but it's already important to be aware of this type. Now, related to this, there's the null value and type. Now, it's very similar to undefined. It means that there is no data, but undefined is the default value for variables and so on, where you never assigned a new value. Null is never a default value, on the other hand. Instead, you have to set something to null to use that value. And that's often used if you want to reset or clear a variable. Let's say you have some user input and you want to reset this. You could set it to an empty string, but you could also set it to null, for example, to make it clear in your program that there currently shouldn't be a value because no value has been entered or whatever. And again, this is especially useful later if we can also run some checks, some conditional checks with if statements to find out if a value is set and then do something, or if it's not set. So undefined and null are important to manage empty data, either because it never was set or because you want to set it to empty, to null. They're very similar, but they're not entirely equal because of the reasons I explained. Now, there also is one other special value, and that's NaN. That stands for not a number. And technically, unlike undefined and null, which also are their own types, this is not a type. Instead, it's of type number. It's not its own type. And you can therefore use it in calculations where you work with numbers. Now, the idea behind NaN is that it's kind of like an error code if you run a calculation with something that doesn't include a number. So if you have, let's say, a multiplication with text or anything like that, then you would get not a number as a result. And if you use the not a number value in a calculation, you also get not a number as a result. So this yields not a number if you use it in calculations, and it's the result of calculations that are invalid. Now, you might wonder why you would ever run an invalid calculation. Keep in mind that JavaScript allows you to write highly dynamic code. So, like in the case of our calculator here, you could have a calculator where users can enter any value, where they are maybe not forced to enter a number, and where therefore you could run a calculation with some user input, which is not a number, and then you could get such a not a number result. Again, this is most useful if you also have the abilities of comparing it or of checking it with some if statement to run some code if you get such an invalid result, but it is worth being aware of this type. Now, to quickly give you an idea of these types, let's clear that JavaScript console here, because here we also can type some JavaScript code, which runs immediately, which is immediately evaluated. And here I want to show you these three types I just talked about. Let's create a variable here, username maybe, and not set this equal to anything, just like this. So we declare it, but we don't initialize it. If you now hit enter, you see undefined here, because that's the return value of this execution here. But if you now write console log username, or actually here in the console, you can just write username and it will automatically log it to the console. You see the value that's in there, and that's also undefined. Now, of course, if I now assign a value like max, and I print this, you see, well, max here. It also showed it here. So that's one thing. We got undefined if we haven't set this to a value yet. Now, if you would want to reset this, as I mentioned, you should never do this. Technically, this would work, but this is not recommended. Instead, you should set this to null now, this other special value. And if you do that, and you have a look into username now, you see this indeed is null. Now for the not a number example, if you run 3 times hi here, you see the result is not a number. If you run 3 times not a number, which is also a special value written like this, you also get not a number. So these are the special types, which for now you should just keep in memory somewhere, and which we'll come back to throughout the course when we'll be able to check for whether a variable has a value or not. For now, just loosely keep these values in mind.